All right, guys, so Norm Finkelstein recently went on with Piers Morgan to debate this guy over here, Benny Morris, who is a prominent Israeli historian who I think Norm has actually credited in the past for helping to uncover some of the various crimes that were committed against Palestinians during the founding of the State of Israel in the late 1940s and early 1950s, during what Palestinians call the Nakba, where thousands were slaughtered and hundreds of thousands more were forcefully expelled from their land. Unfortunately, it seems like nowadays the primary function of Benny Morris is to be a genocide apologist, defending what Israel is doing right now in Gaza. So let's go ahead and jump into this first clip where Norm Finkelstein exposes that, brings up a recent poll that we covered on this channel, and calls him a Holocaust denier.
Fully one half of Israeli Jews believe that Israel should conduct a genocide in Gaza. That's what the poll result showed. 82%.
That's a lie. That is a lie.
I know, Benny, everybody's lying.
There's
but
never been a
finish.
poll about supporting genocide. This is nonsense. You're purveying lies.
Okay, Benny.
What is that poll, Norman? What is that poll, Norman? It seems a very important poll. What is that poll you're referring to?
It was a university, if my memory is correct, it was a University of Pennsylvania poll. It was reported everywhere. Benny Morris knows about the poll. He's fully informed of the poll. But he's doing his job as an official Israeli propagandist.
No, I have no job. I don't like his government.
Benny,
I'm not their spokesman.
You've reduced yourself. Mr. Benny, you've reduced yourself to the level of a Holocaust denier. It's a real shame that you have sunk so low. But allow me to continue. The poll showed that 82% of Israeli Jews, 82% support a forced expulsion from Gaza.
That's not the same as genocide.
Population.
That may be true. That may be true, but that's not genocide. That's not genocide. What you said before about genocide is total nonsense. Total nonsense.
Piers, you're going to have to ask Benny Morris to please allow me to speak.
Well, Benny, I will let you respond to this.
You're taking up all the time, though.
Yeah, Norman, you must give him a chance to respond.
Okay, I will finish. I will finish. Then one of the leaders of the opposition in Israel described Israeli soldiers as killing children as a hobby in Gaza. Now, yes, he took it back. He took it back after he came under ferocious attack. But he himself acknowledged, when I debated Mr. Morris about a year ago, and I said that Israel targets children, he laughed. He thought it was such a funny remark by me.
It's absolute
nonsense.
Okay, so in terms of that last bit there, that it's apparently nonsense that Israel is killing children for hobby, or if you don't like the word hobby, maybe just killing children at a mass scale that's incomprehensible to the human mind and incomparable to anything that we've witnessed in warfare in modern times, then sure, you could go with that second definition, I guess. But yeah, we did have the leader of the Israeli opposition who said that Israel is currently killing children for sport. We also had the former prime minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, who came out and said, yes, we are committing war crimes. And this is a guy who presided over Operation Cast Lead as the prime minister of Israel and committed war crimes himself. So, when you have guys like the former prime minister, war criminal, when you have guys like the Israeli opposition leader, when you have guys like even Piers Morgan, who have been one of the staunchest defenders of Israel throughout this genocide, and they're starting to turn on what Israel is doing, maybe you would have some basic fundamental questions about potential war crimes or crimes against humanity there. Now, just in terms of what we've seen over the last couple of weeks here, some stories that I mentioned in previous videos as well, in terms of the endless killing of children, we had 9 out of Gaza doctor's 10 children who were killed in one Israeli airstrike, and then the charred bodies of her children ended up at the hospital where she was working. 9 out of 10 of her children were killed in this one strike. We also, of course, covered this horrifying image that looks like it's straight out of hell with this young girl here, I believe she was around 5 years old, who was desperately trying to make it through a fire that was started because Israel bombed a school that was turned into essentially a refugee camp for displaced Palestinians. And this girl thankfully survived, but essentially the rest of her family was largely wiped out as a part of this fire. Now, those are just a couple recent examples that we've seen. Obviously, we had other reports. Some of the most notable were Gaza doctors from around the world who had served in Gaza, reporting that they treated children who had sniper bullet wounds to the head and to the chest. I mean, the notion that you could have, bare minimum at this point, 16 to 18,000 dead children on your hands, and that's not intentional, that's just a normal aspect of war where almost half the population that you're killing is children. Like, no, this is not an accident. This is not a oopsie daisy. This is part of an intentional strategy of making life in Gaza impossible. This is what happens when you engage in widespread indiscriminate bombings, dropping more firepower than we saw during like London and Hamburg during World War II combined, right? This is what's going to happen when that's the reality. And Benny Morris just sort of shrugs it off there. Now, in terms of the poll that Norm Finkelstein was citing there, he was a little bit off on the numbers, but he was basically entirely correct. Now, Benny Morris insisted that there's never been a poll that's, asking Israelis whether or not they support genocide. Now, to his credit, I guess, the poll didn't directly ask, do you support genocide? But it effectively did ask the same thing. So I'll remind you guys of what exactly this poll said. Here from Penn State University, the question was asked to Jewish Israelis, do you support the claim that the IDF, in conquering an enemy city, should act in a manner similar to the way the Israelites did when they conquered Jericho under the leadership of Joshua, i.e., to kill all inhabitants? To kill all inhabitants. In other words, a genocide. 47% of all respondents answered in the affirmative. So I think Norm said 52%, but whatever. 47%, basically half of Israeli Jews, said that they support killing all the inhabitants of Gaza. That's what they said. I mean, you might not like what that says about Israeli society broadly, but that's what the fucking poll says. They continued here. They said 65% of those surveyed answered that there is a current incarnation of Amalek, and of these, 93% responded that the mitzvah to erase the memory of Amalek is relevant to that contemporary Amalek. We've talked about this story of Amalek where God commands the Israelites to go and wipe out everybody, not to spare men, women, child, ox, camel, sheep, etc. Because Benjamin Netanyahu has brought up that story multiple times to explain what they're trying to do to Gaza. Again, this is a genocidal story that we're talking about here. You have 47% saying that we should essentially kill all the inhabitants of Gaza. You have 65% saying that basically Gaza is the current incarnation of Amalek, which again is a genocidal question to be asking, and 65% answer in the affirmative. Like, again, maybe this should spark some questions for the current state of Israeli society. Now, we also had down here in terms of the other numbers, 82% of those who were surveyed expressed support for the forced deportation of residents of the Gaza Strip. Now, this was the moment in that clip where Benny Morris says, okay, well, maybe that's true, but the genocide part of it isn't true. And he sort of shrugged that off, which is just wild to me to think that, okay, maybe you don't want, maybe the population doesn't support genociding the population, but 82% support the mass ethnic cleansing of Palestinian civilians from Gaza, and he just sort of shrugs that off of like, yeah, that might be true. I'm sorry, what? That's not a shrug off kind of a statement here. When 82% of a population supports mass ethnic cleansing of 2 million people, half of whom are children. That's not something to shrug off and pretend like, oh, well, that's not really a big deal. There's nothing further we could read into this, right? And then the other shocking part of this, well, I guess not shocking, but insane part of this poll, was even a majority of Jewish Israelis, 56%, supported even the forced deportation of Arab citizens from Israel. So not only do they want to ethnically cleanse or to wipe out the Palestinian population in Gaza, they also want to expel them from Israel, which is ironic, I guess, because one of the main defenses that you'll hear from Israel defenders is, well, within Israel, we live peacefully and coincide with our Palestinian neighbors or with Arab neighbors that we have, and everything is amazing and multicultural here. We're not an ethno-state. We're not racist. Meanwhile, you have a poll that a majority of Jewish Israelis want to expel the Arab population from Israel. Like, this is fucking insane, guys. This is not a healthy society, to say the least. This is a society that has fundamentally lost their fucking minds, right? In a whipped up fascist genocidal hysteria that we're witnessing here. So, I mean, stunning poll here, not shocking, but stunning poll that Norm was bringing up there. We also have other polling that I think is interesting in terms of the rest of the world, at least relative to Israel, not necessarily losing their minds and actually saying, hey, what you guys are doing is fucking wrong and we don't want our governments to support it. So on that here, we had a YouGov poll that was from earlier this year. And you look at these various countries. We got Germany, we got France, we got the UK, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, and Italy. And in every single one of these, in the question of Israel's favorability, you have over 50%, well over 50%. In fact, in a majority of these countries, it's over 60%, some of them climbing up to nearly 70% disapproval of Israel right now. So the world's population, right, even in Western European countries, even in the United States, has fully turned against Israel at this point. What does that mean? Well, it means they're turning themselves into an international pariah. The unfortunate part about that is that since we don't live in a real democracy, especially here in the United States, and we have massive influence from Israel, from the Israel lobby within our political system, our governments are not necessarily keeping up with where the population is at, but it is at least somewhat reassuring that by huge majorities around the world, people are not wanting to allow Israel to get away with this shit, right? They're not thinking that this is a new norm that we should accept as a reality. And I guess that's a little bit of hope within all of this, because I've been talking about how not only is Israel destroying the Palestinian people as a whole, but they're also destroying the notion that international law, right, that human rights, that, you know, we should follow basic rules when it comes to these kinds of things, right, or that we should really value humanity in general, that human lives have value. And I've been saying they've been destroying that. But you look at polling data like this and it's like, okay, well, maybe if we have some sort of like Nuremberg level response to what Israel is doing here, and we hold the leaders accountable for perpetuating this genocide, then there is some hope on the horizon, I guess, that we could potentially recover from this. And at least by huge majorities, people around the world are not putting up with this. Now, we also have here a second clip where Norm Finkelstein gets to the point that in order to defend Israel right now, you have to basically ignore everything. You have to ignore everything except for, I guess, like IDF spokesman, right? So let's go ahead and watch this clip.
UNICEF is lying. The whole world, which says there's a massive starvation verging on famine in Gaza, it's all made up.
Well, one thing, listen, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be, Norman, you don't have to be. You don't have to be an expert to know if you stop food going in sufficient quantities to a population that's already been at war since October 2023, and many of them are young kids. They're going to start starving to death, and they will. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you both for a spirited debate. If the food doesn't arrive. Yeah, well, the food hasn't been arriving because there's been a blockade. We're going to leave it there.
No, it started again now arriving.
Well, that's very generous of Israel, isn't it? After 3 months of starving people.
It's not a matter of generosity. There's also international pressure.
Yeah,
3 months of starving 1 million children.
Got to leave it there.
3 months of starving 1 million children.
Got to leave it there. It's unconscionable, like I said.
So, I mean, even Piers Morgan getting in on that and seeing through the complete bullshit of what I guess Benny Morris's position here is. I mean, it's untenable at this point. It's untenable. And even what he was saying there at the end, that, oh, because they're now allowing a tiny, minuscule trickle of aid into Gaza as a part of this plan to basically bait the population further and further south so that they can eventually push them out of Gaza entirely. The idea that, like, that's sufficient, that somehow negates the fact that you have been starving this population from the beginning of this genocide, and then you completely cut off all humanitarian aid a couple of months ago and have been starving them for almost 3 months, like, this is not a tenable thing to defend at this point. So you can see why Benny Morris is struggling to do that. And as Norm was pointing out there, you know, you have to ignore, right? Let's think about this. You have to ignore the United Nations, right? Organizations like UNRWA and UNICEF. You have to ignore the World Food Program. You have to ignore Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem. You have to ignore basically every single human rights organization on the face of the planet, the United Nations, most countries around the world, and even ignore the genocidal statements from top Israeli officials and from IDF soldiers themselves in order to believe that what Israel is doing at this point is self-defense, that it's not genocidal. On top of that, you also have to disbelieve what you're witnessing with your own eyes, right? The endless war crimes that we're seeing on a daily basis, the endless daily death and destruction and carnage that's coming out of Gaza. I mean, we have at this point dozens and dozens, in some cases over 100 people that are being massacred on a daily basis inside of Gaza. So this is not something that's defensible. And, while I'm giving Piers a little bit of credit here at this point, again, the point of seeing this switch here from Piers, I think says a lot, because he was one of the hardest defenders of Israel. He was ride or die. He would sometimes criticize them, but for the most part, he was a defender of what they're doing. And he says it's a moral quandary and they're acting in self-defense. And well, what do you expect them to do? So the fact that even he at this point is switching it up, it tells you that, sure, he's probably somebody who's just, putting his finger in the wind and seeing where things are going. But it says that he doesn't necessarily want to be morally culpable for how this is playing out from this point forward. That it's gotten to such a point that we're now entering sort of the final solution from Israel, that even guys like Piers Morgan are like, I need to maybe rehabilitate my reputation on this. Now, I don't think that we should allow defenders and perpetrators who have allowed this to happen to get away with rehabilitating their reputations. But again, it's just a marker of where we're at this point. Now, a little bit of updates on how exactly this aid delivery program that Benny was referencing there is going at this point, and then I'll finish off the video. We have here from the New York Times, the UN is now condemning Israel's new aid program in Gaza after a chaotic start. They say, the United Nations denounced a new Israeli-backed aid operation in southern Gaza on Wednesday, a day after the chaotic launch of the initiative, when thousands of hungry Palestinians stormed a food distribution site, prompting Israel to fire warning shots. They say the episode further raised questions over Israel's latest attempt to overhaul the provision of aid to Gazans in what Israeli leaders called an attempt to sideline Hamas. The United Nations and many other humanitarian groups have boycotted the initiative, which has also drawn anger from many of Israel's Western backers. Now, in terms of the claim that the reason that Israel is going with this U.S. mercenary group to do this aid distribution in the way that they're doing it is because Hamas was stealing all of the aid, this is bullshit. There's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, even Cindy McCain, the widow of the hawkish Republican Senator John McCain, who was a Zionist through and through, has come out and said that the UN Food Program chief is denying that claims Hamas is stealing aid from the Gaza trucks and the aid systems there. So even Cindy McCain is coming out and saying, no, this is not what's happening. If anything, when people are looting these aid trucks, it's one of two things. It's desperate Palestinians who have been starved for months on end, who need something to eat, right? Who need basic equipment and supplies to survive to the next day. So that's an aspect of it. Obviously, there's going to be chaos involved in the distribution of that aid when you're using it or when you're distributing it in the centralized way that Israel and the US is going about in this situation. And the other looting that we've covered before on this channel is from gangs within Gaza that are backed by Israel, that are armed by Israel and supported by Israel, in an intentional effort to make the aid distribution chaotic, right? And that's some important thing to, that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're reading an article like this, is that it's not chaotic because they're incompetent, right? It's not chaotic because this is just the way that it has to be. No, it's chaotic by design. Okay, this is why they completely cut off aid from getting into Gaza for months on end. They don't want aid to be adequately facilitated to the Palestinian population in Gaza. They don't want that. And so instead, they're doing it in a way that is obviously going to end in chaos. That is obviously going to end with people being killed or injured as a part of this. That's part of the strategy of this aid distribution. So we continue here in this New York Times article. They say, under the new Israeli design system, only 4 aid sites in southern Gaza, again, baiting the population downward, are being secured by Israeli soldiers and overseen by private U.S. contractors. Previously, the United Nations led the distribution of aid in the enclave, but Israeli officials have been eager to bypass the world body, accusing it of anti-Israel bias and of failing to prevent Hamas from hoarding supplies. Again, something that is not happening. They say the UN officials have boycotted the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, saying that it fundamentally violates humanitarian principles, obviously, and the foundation aims to replace more than 100 distribution sites with just 4, requiring Palestinians to travel miles and pass through a corridor of Israeli troops to obtain aid. And we can see some of the images of people doing this. Now, this doesn't even take into account, if you're expecting people to walk for miles on end through the hot sun in order to go to this site to potentially wait in a line for hours and hours to get a tiny parcel like this of food that in many circumstances, from what we've seen, is unusable because, it's like pasta or flour when Palestinians don't have adequate access to water to cook the food in, to, electricity to be able to cook the food or to boil water. Like, it's totally inadequate, but it also doesn't take into account Palestinians who are injured, Palestinians who are sick, Palestinians who are elderly, who can't go and walk miles in the beating sun and then standing around for hours in order to get this aid. So again, it's not a serious aid distribution plan that we're witnessing, and the numbers bear that out at this point. They say as of Wednesday, 2 distribution sites were operational and more than 14,000 parcels of aid had been distributed. 14,000 of these kinds of parcels for a population of 2 million who have been starved for months on end at this point. I mean, it is a sick joke. So I'll leave you guys off with that. At this point, I'm in full agreement with Norm Finkelstein, to his credit. At this point, anybody who is defending what Israel is doing right now to Gaza, you are a Holocaust denier. You are a Holocaust denier. There's just no other way to put it. And history is not going to look kindly on these people.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying